For this week's ODAC 40 Top Moments feature, we're joined by Bridgewater College head football coach Mike Clark. And, Coach, thanks for joining us today.
Well, I appreciate the call. Stagg Bowl week's always a big week for Division III, and the ODAC as a host, that's always a unique feature, and it's something we look forward to. It gives us a nice break here right before Christmas.
Well, and Stagg Bowl is exactly where we're going today. Is you alluded to that we are hosting the Division III Football National Championship. This is the 24th time that it's in Salem and the 44th time overall for the game. And, Coach, your program has experience playing in that game. And when I say that, just talk to me a little bit about the feelings that still come to you when you think about that your team was one that was able to play in the Stagg Bowl back in 2001.
Well, it's one thing you're always going to remember. You're never going to not take for granted when you got caught up in the thrill of the moment. But by the same token, I always tell our people you got to be careful and not let your memories be greater than your dreams. Having experienced it, it was I don't want to hope maybe it wasn't a once in a lifetime thing for us. It gives us something to aspire to, but I have a full understanding of what it takes to get there. It's going to take a group with tremendous talent, and it's going to take a group that's going to have to get a little bit of luck along the way too.
Mike, what made that team special? You talk about luck, you talk about talent. I think talent, for the most part, probably is paramount, probably more than luck in that equation. But what made that group the right group to make that run?
Well, I think you can't. I'm not going to diminish the talent of that group there, Brad. In that group, a lot of times we refer to them as play-up players. We'll look at our roster and we'll say, who do we have on this roster right now or in our two deep that's a play-up player? And really what I mean by that is that who's a kid that's playing Division III but really doesn't belong here? And really, I remember one time we went back and counted, and in that group, I had 15 of those kids that I would have rated as play-up players. They were play-up players. But I also think really it was a group that 15 of the people that played in that game started in the last game we played back in 1998 on an 0-10 team as freshmen. So, you were able to really take kids that had a great deal of experience, and if you'll go back and you look at the history, really the year before that in 2000, that team made a nice little run in the playoffs themselves. We lost a triple overtime game in the second round down in Texas to a very good Trinity football team. And essentially, I think we had 7 seniors, on the team in 2000. It was really one of those deals coming back. We knew that team had a chance to be a special group. They stayed together really all summer. I remember it's the number of kids that sacrificed, which doesn't happen a lot in Division III, that they were going to stay together and work, and really the energy that they kind of put in on their own. It was something that they earned. I mentioned that we had to. Do you get lucky? Yeah, you need to get a break now and then. But by the same token, that team was a very talented group.
When you reflect on that season, Mike, you continue to mention luck, and I understand why. But what was lucky that year? What stands out to you that was, you felt like you made it over the hump and you dodged something that you needed to dodge?
We stayed very healthy over a 13, 14 game season. That's a little bit of luck. I had a quarterback that played at a very high level for 13, 14 games, and certainly it was a quarterback-centric game then. It still is now. Gosh, Brad, we had a clock jam, and I'm as somebody mentioned that earlier, I said, was that a big controversy for you? I said it was on Saturday night one night, but by Sunday we had let it go and moved on. I understand there were perspectives. There's 2 different perspectives involved in, that situation. It involved in the semifinals against Rowan. So, that game was defined. We played it well, and won it. So, I look back on those things that popped up. Hey, we were playing Washington in the league. We were down 14, and they were going in to score. And, I had a defensive end strip one of their running backs and run it 90 yards for a touchdown, to start a 21-point fourth quarter to give us a chance to win that game to overtime. Was that luck or skill? I don't know. But I think sometimes in those situations, Brad, You don't overanalyze it. Remember Frank Beamer always used to say, and we talk sometimes, he goes, Mike, sometimes the discards are getting dealt and that you're playing the right cards and you're getting the right cards dealt in your hand. And certainly that was one of those years. And, I never take that for granted. Somebody asked me one time, I thought I had teams in 2002, 2003, and 2005 that were Stagg Bowl caliber that didn't get there. I've had a handful of 8-2 teams over the last 10 years here that I thought were ODAC championship caliber teams, but didn't get there. So, I'm not going to overanalyze it. It was just a great run. Like a lot of runs, you hope you appreciated it enough while you were in the middle of it, but sometimes that isn't the case. You just stay so busy.
Coach, you started to touch on an interesting point there that we've heard from one of the coaches in this year's game. Pat Cerrone from UW-Oshkosh has talked about how he's thought he had teams that were just as talented and whatnot, but maybe there was one or two things that put him over the top this year. And this year, the one that he talked about in a post-game press conference after the semifinals was that the players really took care of their bodies, nutrition and things like that. So that was what he attributed to part of the reason why they were to get over the hump this year. What do you see about that Bridgewater team that you had, that you look back at those other talented teams that you've talked about that you've had, that put that group over the hump in 2001?
Well, I think what they experienced as a young group, I really thought, I always ask my kids, I said, how much equity do you have in that? And unless the kid's a business major, I usually have to explain what equity means to them. But I thought you really had a group that had deep investment in that. They started it from ground zero. I think sometimes in this day and age, kids don't want to take ownership. In Division III, everybody's a free agent if you want. If things aren't going well, you move. And I really thought to have those kids, particularly in the '98 season, to go through it. It's a little bit of an oxymoron, but we were a competitive 0-10 team. Now, if I would have played 15 games that year, I would have been 0-15. I would have been competitive, but I would have been 0-15. It was just one of those type seasons. But I thought really for those kids to step up and really kind of take ownership of something that wasn't good and say, I'm going to hang around and correct it, to me, that was a special thing. I mean, I really thought that was a special commitment that they made, and it wasn't something they weren't going to give in to adversity or challenge. And certainly over the course of a long football season, particularly a playoff run, you're going to get a lot of that.
Coach, 2001, obviously, we all remember the Twin Towers and the Pentagon and the changes that happened that fall. One of them was moving the FCS games later, I guess, because of the change of perhaps some teams that didn't play the week after September 11th. That gave us a stage for this game at 8 o'clock on ESPN under the lights, which was one of the first times in my recollection from hosting the game since '93 that we had that opportunity. Talk about your prep. If you can get yourself back to that place and talk about what I would say was a very bold call with the first snap in setting the tone against Mount Union that evening.
Well, I thought it was a great call. Coach Colbert put that together, and actually people don't know, Marcus Richardson was the third read on that. It was actually supposed to be a weak side run. We had a kid named P.J. Barry and a really fast tight end at the time named Devin Thornton, who was a freshman, that we thought we were going to slip it out the backside into the boundary to those two, and they were covered, and Jason slid his read over to the middle of the field and was able to hook up with Marcus. So that was a little bit of experience and a little bit of savvy at the quarterback. I do remember, being the local team, being the only game on TV that night. I think I'm probably going to be able to look back and say until the next local team qualifies for that game, we'll have an attendance record that is going to stay pretty secure. And then I remember one time I actually looked up, and I can still remember the number. I said when they said this was the market share that watched that game, and I want to say it was like 987,000 people watched the game, whatever that market share was on ESPN that night. And that's a pretty good chunk of people. And my hope is that they watched that and said, boy, this is good football. These kids are good athletes. These are fast people. And I think there's a lot of public misunderstanding of the caliber of player that's playing at the upper levels of Division III, and hopefully that gave them a chance to see it.
Coach, you get to the end of the game and you fall a little short, but you play and lose to a team that, we all know the history of Mount Union's, supremacy in Division III football. Talk about, I guess, from an outsider looking in and possibly obviously being a part of this culture at the Division III level, how special is what they've done to Division III? And I guess it's probably not. It wasn't easy to come to terms with that after losing to them in 2001. But just not necessarily them, but just the supremacy that both Whitewater and Mount Union have had. How difficult is that?
Well, I think it's very difficult. You can go back and look at our program a little bit there. I mean, I think we were able to take the surge that we got from getting the opportunity to play in that game, recruited very well off of it. We kept that momentum. I would have thought when you look at the caliber of the teams that I put on the field, I thought that really through 2008, I had 2007, at least I had teams that were capable of playing at the national level. And a lot of it was based on that surge. And, sometimes I will say it is harder to maintain than to build. I haven't been in the business a long time. I think there's some truth to that. And you got to give those people credit. I think they've established the fact that, football is going to be the bell cow, for this institution, and we're going to keep our foot off the gas. And if you don't feel that way, get out of our way. And I think that's kind of what they've been able to do. And really what Mount Union did this year in the playoffs was good. They had to go on the road and win games. I think that's something. They've had one road playoff game, I think, since 2004 going into this season. So, you got to give them credit. I have a lot of respect for what they do, but by the same token, the rest of us, let's step up and challenge them. I think that's the nature of the beast. I think what's happened in Division III right now is certainly with the advent of Huddle, the internet, and the computers, teams like Mount Union can become a national team, when they recruit. Their access to data and information and draw is expanded, and it certainly provided a big challenge for the rest of us that, are out there. If we're not careful, sometimes we have a lot of boats fighting in the same pond for the same fish.
Coach, you started to guide into a place I wanted to go there, and if I can take the opposite tack from what Brad just talked about there, this year's Stagg Bowl has relatively two new teams, and UW Oshkosh has never been there before. This is only their third trip to the NCAA tournament, and then you've got a Mary Hardin Baylor team, which is only 19 years old in its existence under Coach Pete Fredenberg, and is in the Stagg Bowl for the second time. So, again, two relatively new teams. How important do you think that is on the other side from what we just talked about, that we kind of break the trend that was happening with Mount Union for 11 straight seasons, and then Whitewater was in there for a long time, and St. Thomas has been the only other team that's been in there since the last time Mount Union wasn't there in 2004. How important do you think that is, that other teams start to break through like a John Carroll did this year?
Well, I think it's, no offense to Mount Union, I have a lot of respect for what they do and or Whitewater. I think it's healthy. I do think it's healthy. I think the people in Roanoke wanted somebody different. I'm sure I'm not speaking for them all, but I think it's healthy for the sport. I really do. Now, don't kid yourself. Mary Hardin Baylor is a national player. I mean, they've played at they just haven't gotten back to that point. But when you go down to Mary Hardin Baylor and you see what their facilities are, how they're set up. I mean, they've made a commitment to be a national player at the Division III level, but I think it's good for the program. I think the difficult thing is we used to have a coach up here at JMU that always said, getting into the 1AA playoffs is the hardest thing there is in college sports. And I said, no, it's not. I said, getting into the Division III playoffs. is the hardest thing there is in college sports, and making a run at that, because there are just so many of us, and and Brad, you've been in it from an administrative point of view, as long as I've been in it from a coaching point of view. And, it's a big tent. It's a big tent. It's a broad tent with broad interpretations. And in the end, it's going to have to, you're going to have to be good. You're going to have to battle, and it's going to be something you're going to have to commit to. In my time in Division III over 22 years, what I found, and really the people that are successful in Division III football are really the ones that can take a Division I approach, push it to the edge as close as they can, and hang out there and keep their foot on the gas. And that's kind of really what it takes to compete at the national level.
Coach, I guess to reflect back on that 01 team and to wrap things up, I'm sure you named a most valuable player that year. Do you remember who that was? And if not, immediately to mind, who would come to mind for you on that team as being your most valuable player?
We didn't name a most valuable player that year, but it's a sore spot. None of those kids have been elected into the Bridgewater Football Hall of Fame yet. But
I wasn't bringing that up. I didn't know that. So
that's my sore spot. But I would say this: what you get into is certainly. I mean, we had a quarterback that if wasn't our starting quarterback, he would have been a starting middle linebacker. And Jason Lutz just had, he had respect beyond in every corner of that locker room. Not just for his leadership, for his toughness. And really, he was a kid that changed, from what his maturity level was as a freshman to a senior. And, the neat thing, when you think about that team, Brad, I can go down through that roster. I mean, there are 3 doctors that played in that game, that are out there now. And really, you go and you start pointing to people, and boy, those kids have done well. They're young men that have just done very well right now. But, for me to try to say, hey, Devon Cruz was a Division I tailback. Jermaine Taylor hung around the NFL for 3 years as a linebacker, in nickel and dime roles. And gosh, I'd hate to have to say this was the guy. I really don't think there was. I think one of the reasons we were able to kind of enjoy that moment and compete at that level is there were a lot of guys. And don't kid yourself, you win with players, not plans. And I had some great players on that field.
I think that's well said.
Yeah, well, Coach, for me, it was a pleasure to get back and talk to you about this game, because I wasn't there for that one. So just to hear some of the things, I didn't say a whole lot through this, because I just wanted to reflect back and listen to you. So I appreciate you taking the time with us today and joining us for this ODAC 40 Top Moment feature, and wish you the best of luck down the road. And hopefully maybe that road will involve the Eagles eventually getting back to the Stagg Bowl. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you. And people ask me that, and I said, been doing this a long time. I'd love to make one more run. I'm working towards that. The only thing I'd change, Brad, is I'd have the bus get over there early. I'd have the bus drop me at the end of the parking lot,
yep.
And I would parade my team down through the tailgaters, because I do remember that was probably the biggest gathering of brethren tailgaters in the history of the church. Okay, but
well, if I recall correctly, Dr. Stone brought you brought the cafeteria with you, so there was you brought the food services with you.
We brought the food servers with us, and in the end, it was just a great celebration. And I thought, kind of, if your school gets that opportunity, I'll close you with this. There was a guy there named Jesse Hopkins who was the choir conductor and the professor or whatever, distinguished professor of music. And Jesse didn't have one sports bone in his body, and he's a great guy. And if I remember correctly, somebody asked them, saw him one time, I saw him at a gathering. They said, I can't believe you went down to that, Jesse. I didn't know you were a football fan. And Jesse said, it had nothing to do with football. He said, I was a Bridgewater fan. And certainly for Mary Hardin-Baylor and Oshkosh and hopefully Bridgewater again, people that get there, you don't have to be a fan of that football team. You can be a fan of that university or that college and still enjoy the moment.